You two about a number of states have been called, and there are a number of states still out there. Mike McCurry, what do you make of the numbers so far?
Well, I think the numbers are showing what I think we know all along. It's a very, very close election, and it's going to be a long evening. I think the results in Florida have got to be bittersweet for the Bush family. Of course, the brother of Governor Bush, the sitting governor in Florida, that can't be a happy one for the Bush family. But, you know, let's credit Senator Lieberman, running for vice president, who practically parked in Florida, worked very, very hard there. And I think we'll also see, as we get into behind the scenes of these numbers, that the argument that Al Gore made about Social Security and the future of that program really did have some real merit to the voters of Florida. So I think that's very significant. We'll have to see if that stands up as we move west.
Mary, Florida does, as Mike said, have to be a disappointment for the Bush campaign.
Well, I am going to go out on a limb here. We have early data. The spread is 2%. The raw total is 4,000 votes at this point. If it continues at this pace, there are 500,000 absentee ballots out there. I'm just telling you, this reminds me of Duke Machen in California, lost on Tuesday, won on Thursday. I continue.
What are you suggesting, Mary?
I'm suggesting when the real count is in and the absentee ballots are counted, that they are extensive in there, and that state's going to flip. I really feel that way. Now, having said that, there was a strategy to lose Florida and Michigan and carry on and still get to 270 with some of the states that haven't been called yet, but look to be leaning in Bush's direction. But I still feel like that absentee ballot operation there was so extraordinary, and it is documented at 500,000 that it more than covers the spread as it exists right now.
Mike, is that a plausible scenario?
Not a likely scenario. Sounds like a little bit of wishful thinking, but I can understand with the numbers that close how Republicans might still want to think that there's a chance there. But you know, there is something very important. The closeness of these numbers so far, and as we are reporting it and talking about it and reflecting on it, is surely driving up turnout in the West, because people out West who in past elections have been told that their votes aren't going to count are suddenly realizing that there are very large stakes here. It's a very close election, and nobody is running away with it. This may have a real significant impact on turnout out in the Pacific Northwest especially.
Mary, what about the state of Michigan? Clearly, George W. Bush put in, you know, a really strong effort there. I mean, he was in and out of that state a number of times. He certainly fought hard there in the primary, lost that, but there was reason to believe he had a good shot at Michigan.
Well, it was a battleground state. You couldn't just give it up. We have a Republican governor there who worked hard. There are a lot of other things going on in that state, not the least of which was the voucher initiative, which the governor feared would be detrimental to Governor Bush's race there. And you had the heavy union effort. So you couldn't just give it up. But of those big three, it was the one least expected to end up in Bush's column.
All right, Mary Madel and Mike McCurry, we're going to come back to both of you for some time, and throughout this night, I want to.
I have one quick
yes.
point. The UAW got Election Day off as part of its contract for the first time in its history, and I think when people look at Michigan and that union vote that Bill has told us about, once again, John Sweeney, once again, vote poll, Election Day off as a paid holiday. That may have turned Michigan around.
I just want to remind our viewers very quickly the states that we have said where the polls have closed, but still we are not able to call a winner. Ohio, West Virginia, Alabama, Maine, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. And I'm just told that I've just been made a liar. We are able to call the state of Alabama for Texas Governor George W. Bush. Governor Bush takes the 9 electoral votes in the state of Alabama, also known as the heart of Dixie.
Also, CNN is calling the Senate race in New Jersey. Millionaire, multi-millionaire John Corzine, who spent more than $60 million, has won the open seat, turning back the challenge by Republican Bob Franks. Corzine, a big winner in New Jersey, having spent lots of money in the process.
That's a hold.
I was going to say, it goes to show that for $55 or $60 million, you can buy your way into the United States Senate.
Well, in fact, it's most important in terms of the balance of power. That's Frank Lautenberg's seat, so we count that as a hold for the Democrats. But unlike Al Checkey in California or Michael Huffington in California, this enormous, record-busting sum literally paid off.
Back to the race for the White House. If you're just joining our coverage, this is the electoral vote count right now. It's this close. That's right. These figures are correct. Governor Bush with 130 votes. Vice President Al Gore with 119. Bill Schneider, you wanted to make a point about this yellow map or states here on the map that are yellow. It doesn't necessarily mean what?
It doesn't necessarily mean that those states are very close. It means that we're not ready to call them yet, because in some cases there are unprecedented numbers of absentee ballots. For instance, in North Carolina 4 years ago, 60,000 ballots were cast by absentee. This year, 500,000 were counted absentee. So in many of those cases where the state is yellow, it just means we're not ready to call them yet.
In fact, Mary Madeline was even saying in the state of Florida, even though CNN has called the state of Florida for Al Gore, Mary was making the point that there are something like, I think she said, 500,000 absentee ballots that have
Well, when we do call the state, we've taken the absentee ballot count into account. When we call the state, we're pretty sure that state is going to go for the winner. It's just that when we have a state in yellow, that means we're not ready to call it yet. It doesn't necessarily mean that state is neck and neck.
But then again, it could be neck and neck.
It could be neck and neck, but that's not, doesn't necessarily mean that.
But this is a critically important point. If you're just using exit polls, by definition, you can't count absentee ballots. But when we call a state, or anybody else calls a state, they've weighed that into the equation.
That's right.
Which doesn't mean we can't be wrong.
We don't want to mislead our viewers. Not every yellow state is neck and neck.
David Peeler has been telling us for days, he was just here at the beginning of our coverage, it's been 3.5 hours ago, that Mr. Corzine in the primary alone spent $30 million, and here in the general, another $31 million. So, my, what an expensive seat.
Well, speaking of states that we are not able to call, I'm going to wait 13 seconds until I can say this. In the state of Arkansas, where the polls are closing literally as I speak, the home state of President Bill Clinton, we are not able to call. The polls close in Arkansas at 8:30 Eastern Time, and as of this hour, this moment, we are not able to call the result. The land of opportunity. And looking once again, a quick check of the electoral map. George W. Bush racking up 130 electoral votes. His states are in red. Al Gore, the vice president, 119 electoral votes. His states are in blue. And as Bill Schneider just very carefully pointed out, the states in yellow, we are not able to call them yet. It doesn't mean that they will end up close. It just means we don't have enough information at this hour. Even though the polls are closed, we don't have enough information to put them in one corner or another.
And if I... Okay. Mr. Schneider, I believe you have some data.
Yes, we do. Tennessee and Arkansas, these are states that are too close to call. Now, how did that happen? Well, take a look at the voters in Tennessee. We asked them, oh, here it is from Arkansas. Their opinion of Bill Clinton as a person. These are his fellow Arkansans. 61% have an unfavorable personal view of Bill Clinton. So it doesn't look like Bill Clinton helped Al Gore very much in Arkansas. Now, if we can shift to Tennessee, here's what we find. We asked them, the voters there, in deciding how you'd vote today, how important is it to you that Al Gore comes from Tennessee? And look at this, almost 2/3 of them said, you know, that's really not very important at all. So, if you know, that's one reason why the state is very close. If Al Gore does not carry the state of Tennessee, he'll be the first presidential candidate not to carry his home state since George McGovern in 1972.
And the first, and if he were to win the White House without winning Tennessee, he'd be the first since what, James Polk? James K. Polk. I looked this up today.
Well, it depends on how, well, let's see, Richard Nixon, no, he didn't win the White House, so you'd have to go all the way back to James K. Polk. Nixon didn't carry California in 1960, but he lost.
I covered that campaign, so I can
James
speak
K.
with
Polk?
authority. Yeah.
It's interesting that
I wasn't going to bring that up.
Thanks.
It's interesting you point out in Arkansas how the president is regarded, because one of the things we're going to be looking at is what we call the Clinton factor, and trying to figure out whether people who don't like Clinton as a person somehow put that on Al Gore. In Arkansas, it may be that the negative opinion of Bill Clinton is one of the reasons why maybe that's closer than certainly Al Gore would have hoped.
But weren't the polls showing that at least in some instances, people were willing to overlook Clinton's personal failings in their eyes because they agreed with his policies and saying that they would stick
on
theoretically
but here's
with the vice president.
Here's the line that our colleague Mark Shields often uses. If Bill Clinton drove through a car wash in a convertible with the top down, Al Gore would get wet. It may be that
Even
they
if he were in the trunk, I think.
it may be, even if he wasn't in the car, it may be that people are willing to forgive Clinton, but they you know, we're going to find out, but stick Al Gore with the responsibility for what they didn't like. This is something that we'll be finding out through the night.
As they do in the National Football League, I'm going to throw a yellow flag on the anchor desk and say, if you're just joining us, Governor Bush is leading Vice President Gore 130 to 119 electoral votes in the race for the White House. We have much, much more to come. When we come back, Larry King live with a special guest, and Wolf Blitzer bringing us up to speed on the latest on the battle for the Hill and the balance of power. Back in a moment, wherever you're watching in the world.
It is 8:36 in the East Coast. CNN has a call to make, at least 3/4 of a call to make, in the state of Maine. Maine is one of only 2 states in the country that allows its electoral votes to be decided according to congressional district. There are 2 of those districts in Maine. What we can say is that Al Gore will carry 3 of Maine's electoral votes, and Bill Schneider, we are only able to say the 4th electoral vote is undetermined. Can you quickly explain what all this means?
I'll try. Maine has 4 electoral votes. There are 2 congressional districts. It gets 1 electoral vote for each district. If you carry the district, you get that electoral vote. Then if you carry the entire state, you get 2 additional electoral votes, because Maine has 2 electoral votes for the congressional districts and 2 for the state, because it has 2 senators from Maine. So if you carry the state, you get 2. If you carry each congressional district, you get 1 for each district. The other state that does that is Nebraska. It divides its electoral votes up district by district.
At least this much of the Maine result, I think, has to be a personal disappointment for the Bush family. They have a longtime summer home there in Kennebunkport. George W. Bush was in there at least a couple of times campaigning. So, but we will see. Perhaps he'll be able to pull out, one assumes he'll be able to pull out that vote. We don't know. Larry King is in Washington with a special guest.
Thank you, Judy, with 3 special guests. They are the Honorable Ann Richards, former Democratic governor of Texas, Howard Baker, the former Senate Majority Leader, former Reagan Chief of Staff, and Bob Woodward, the Pulitzer Prize-winning assistant managing editor of the Washington Post, right up to what we know right now, they just gave it a Maine. How do you see it, Ann?
I don't know how to call it, Larry, and that is the honest-to-God truth, since I know everything.
You do.
But tonight,
You don't know.
we're not going to know until we get to the West.
Senator Baker.
No, I agree with that. I think that at this point, I had thought and hoped that George Bush would be further along, but it's still too close to call.
Are you disappointed?
Mildly, but it's not over yet. You know, it's not over till we, as Ann says, till we get some more results from the West in particular and from Pennsylvania.
This is a Yogi night.
It is. I mean, so close it's scary.
It ain't over till it's over.
And what's interesting, to take a moment and think about the candidates. I remember talking to George McGovern, who was the Democratic nominee in '72, and he got killed by Nixon. I think McGovern won a single state. And I asked, what were you thinking on Election Day with all the polls showing you have to lose? He said, I thought I was going to win. You, as a candidate, live in a bubble. Now, those 2 candidates, one of them is going to have his heart broken.
But both said it would be close, didn't they? And they kept saying it.
Yeah, but
Both
saying
were confident, but
it's close and feeling it in your heart, you know, that's another thing. Because you're out there, you've got the crowds, they come to see you, they're with you, and you have to believe that you're going to carry that state. I think both of these candidates were told by their staff and by their pollsters, you're going to win this election. I don't think there's any doubt of that.
Huge black turnout, surprising, Howard?
A big turnout all over, you know, in every sector of society. It may be, almost certainly will be a record turnout, and, you know, regardless of who wins, that's a marvelous thing.
And that also confounds the experts who predicted, what, 48% would turn out.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who predicted a massive turnout like we're seeing tonight.
Why, Bob?